Well, here we are, a new year, starting off the right way. And we are trying to get through all the glow and the aftermath of Christmas debt and sporadic schedules and dysfunctional family gatherings and pre- and post-Christmas sales and return packages from UPS. And, of course, that birth of Jesus thing. And so now we're left trying to determine who this Jesus is. Who was this little guy that was delivered on the doorsteps of this obscure village no one really heard about, who went completely unnoticed by his very own people, and even in the presence of barn animals? Who is this child? And why does this child deserve my time, my effort, my energy, my resources? Who is this Jesus? This is a question that has been asked from not the very day he was born, but actually 30 years after he was born, even to this day. So for the next month or so, we're going to ask and re-ask this very question: who is this Jesus? And come up with some solutions, some answers, something for us to contemplate as we try to determine the answers to the best of our ability. Last Sunday, Dan shared the story of the Magi, the astrologers from the east who came to visit the child. That story, as well as that is in Matthew, and as well as the other story that's in Luke of shepherds and angels singings, and always make the greatest productions and most beautiful stories in childhood plays imaginable. But they miss the point completely. Absolutely, completely. Let's make it personal. How many of you, raise your hands, have delivered your child in a barn? Anybody? And not just a barn, but because you were there, it was the only place that you could go because everybody else rejected you. Anybody? Not only that, not one person, not one doctor, not one person in your family, not even one friend of yours was there to lend you some kind of aid or to be by your side. Anybody have this experience? How would you capture that experience? Would you make a glamorous play, create a multi-billion-dollar month-long event to celebrate the best way that you were rejected by the world? Probably not. What I like about the Gospel of John is that he doesn't really create stories of what might have occurred or to tell a story of how God was rejected. He just kind of lays it on the line. And I like that. He talks straight from the hip, shoots straight from the hip. John just kind of reveals kind of the sad state of affairs through his words. He says this, and it starts off with beautiful imagery. In the beginning was the Word. Image that. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What had come into being in him was life. And the life was the light of the people. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. What a beautiful story. What a glorious beginning. The creator of all of the heavens and all of the earth has come to us. Not disappointed because of our failures, our fears, or our dysfunction, but has chosen to love us. This creator has chosen to guide us and provide for us a way of life that could lead us to the most fullness that we could possibly imagine in our world. The creator of the universe is coming to us in human flesh. What a gift this is. What a spectacular moment that John is picturing for us. How much could we benefit as human beings of knowing exactly how God is, of knowing the Creator, knowing where all of our fears and doubts and misconceptions will finally be laid to rest, will be removed forever, for God is now being revealed to us. What can go wrong? Then John continues. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of the blood, who were born not of the will of flesh, who were born not by the will of another person, but born of God. The Christmas story of Jesus begins with the first part that states, "For God so loved the world that God gave us God's only Son, and nobody cared." But the second part of the story is what's so powerful. Instead of pouting, instead of seeking revenge, instead of punishing those who would not attend, instead of being bitter, God just moved on to the ones who are most available. The lonely, the disconnected, the forgotten, those living in darkness, those who were shunned by God's people, the outcast shepherd, some Gentile astrologers from a foreign country of all things. Just who is this Jesus? This Jesus who invaded our space. What kind of God do we really have? Who is this Jesus? Good question. You know, as much as a big deal we make out of Christmas, there's very little that's known about his birth. Only a few people really took into that. All it says is Mary pondered these things in her heart. And likewise, you know, even when he was a young child, even through young adulthood, there's little that's known about that as well. I mean, Luke takes a stab at it, and he states the obvious in his gospel. And he says this, he says, you know, Jesus just kind of grew in wisdom. He grew in stature. He just kind of grew up, didn't he? I mean, that summarizes about 30 years right there. You know, he got smarter, he got taller, he connected with people, he connected with God, and that's just what we have. So it's kind of amazing to me that here is God walking the face of the earth for 30 years and nobody even knew it. I mean, think about that. Nobody even paid attention, nobody figured it out, but he did get people's attention. The first time he got someone's attention was when he actually went back to his home church to preach, which I don't recommend. Because they did what, you know, people do when they raise you. Oh, isn't he cute? You got a little fella up there. Remember when he was little? That's Joseph's little boy, right? And then we start opening his mouth and start saying things. They kind of got offended. Because who does he think he is? Telling us what to do. We know what to do, right? So anyway, that caused a lot of discomfort from his congregation, who then responded by what? Well, they led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so they might hurl him off a cliff. Bingo. Now that's what you call a sermon right there. I've had a few threats, but nothing like that before. What we learned through reading the stories of Jesus is that this would not be the last time that people would discard his words. It would not be the last time that his motives would be questioned. It would not be the last time that his life was threatened. That was to be a way of life. And so when it came time a couple of years down the road for Jesus to take that final trek to Jerusalem where he's going to celebrate the Passover, it really didn't take a prophet to figure out that this just might be his last trip. Even Peter figured that part out. They knew something was in the making. There's too much tension. There's too much opposition. And it was mounting so much that something was about to break. And so instead of just trekking down there on his own, he grabbed his disciples, and there they went off to this little bitty retreat center in Caesarea Philippi, this Gentile country, and they sat there with his disciples, and he talked through this whole thing so that they knew who he was. And that's where we read these words. Now, when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said to him, "Well, some say you're John the Baptist. Others say you're Elijah. Some say you're Jeremiah, maybe some other prophet." But he asked a very important question. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon answered, "You're the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I'm going to tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth, you'll bind in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth, you lose in heaven." And then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. See, people everywhere were trying to figure out who this Jesus was, no different than us. Was he just someone who was ushering in the real Messiah? Was he just another one of those prophets in this long line of God's messengers? Was he just this profound teacher with a jaded past? But Peter got it. He said, Jesus didn't come to talk about God. Jesus didn't come just to prepare people for God, not just to warn the church about God. Jesus is God. Jesus is the Son of God, the face of God, the heart of God, the character of God. It is one thing to know about God. It is quite another thing to know God. Jesus is God. And everything that we need to know, everything we need to understand about God has been given to us in this person of Jesus. Even today, we wonder who this Jesus is. And we have a lot of names that we have for Jesus: teacher, counselor, friend. And a lot of the names that we have for Jesus, have human characteristics to him, but he's so much more than that. Jesus is God who created the heavens and the earth. Jesus is the God who knitted you in your mother's womb. Jesus is the God who gave you a purpose for living, a direction for life, a vision for who you are. Do you know this God who is revealed to us in the gospel? Do you live like it matters? Live like you care. Are you listening? Are you thankful for this God with everything that you have to share and everything that you are? Who is Jesus to you?